Hello, bonjour. Welcome to the Union Safety Net, le filet de sécurité syndicale, a union podcast for working people. I'm your host, Sébastien Bezeau, et oui, parfois en français aussi. This podcast is hosted by the Union of Safety and Justice Employees, le syndicat des employés de la sécurité et de la justice. Join us for an informative discussion every month about issues currently affecting working people. Following the U.S. elections on November 5th, President-elect Donald Trump has been attempting to reshape the political conversation in Canada. Perhaps predictably, Trump has talked a lot about border control and security, particularly regarding the flow of migrants and fentanyl into the states. He has threatened to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports to the United States unless Canada makes changes to border control. Shortly after that threat, the Government of Canada announced a multitude of changes costed at approximately $1.3 billion. Changes include new helicopters at the border, migration controls, new money laundering rules, and a joint Canada-US anti-fentanyl police task force. The government's plan is based on what it calls 5 pillars: detecting and disrupting the fentanyl trade, introducing new tools for law enforcement, enhancing operational coordination, increasing information sharing, and tightening the immigration and asylum system. The government is giving the Canada Border Service Agency funds to train new dog teams to sniff out illegal drugs and new chemical detection tools to deploy at high-risk ports of entry. To date, though, we still don't know how much money the agency will be receiving from the government or the speed at which these measures will be implemented. To discuss these new developments and how it will impact border security, we are joined by Mark Weber, National President of the Customs and Immigration Union, the union that represents Canada's frontline customs and immigration officers. CIU also represents investigation, intelligence, and trade customs officers, immigration inland enforcement and hearings officers, as well as all support staff, all of whom work at the Canada Border Services Agency. Mr. Weber, welcome to the Union Safety Net.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Mr. Weber, we are thrilled to have you on the show given how the Canada-US border is becoming a political hot potato. So tell to our audience here, prior to becoming national president, what was your role at the CBSA?
I worked as an officer at Pearson Airport. I started in 2003, spent my career on the line at the busiest port of entry in Canada.
Wow. Okay, well, let's have, not fun questions, but more relaxed. Did you ever watch the now canceled reality TV show about border officers? It was called Border Security, Canada's Frontline. And if you did watch it, how realistic was it?
I've seen snippets. I've never managed to make it through an entire episode. It was not my favorite show. I mean, in terms of realism, it was a lot of little mismatched snippets that were put together to try to make a narrative. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they really picked cases that properly give a picture of what working at the CBSA is actually. It's funny, people who know that I work for the CBSA, it's one of the first questions they always ask, have you seen the show? And I understand it's quite popular.
Yeah.
A lot of our members are not too happy about cameras following them around. It did create some problems with the workplace. Yeah, not my favorite show.
Well, I'm sure the second most popular question that you get is, what's the wildest thing you've ever confiscated during your work?
Oh,
the sigh.
I know where to start. I mean, so much. Probably the freakiest was I pulled out a Kool-Aid container out of someone's bag and looked in, and there was a toy in the container. And then when I was holding the toy, I realized that it was a live turtle, which was... I actually almost dropped it, yeah. And it ended up being, someone was smuggling in quite a rare turtle that ended up being placed in a museum eventually. But that was a little bit crazy to have something in your hand that you suddenly realize is alive.
Yeah, I'm sure all the stories you face are quite amazing. But the role that all of your members play is so vital. So let's get into the thick of it. Are Donald Trump's claims about the Canada-U.S. border accurate about the flow of migrants and fentanyl into the U.S.?
I mean, they're wildly exaggerated.
You mean Trump exaggerates?
Hard to believe that it's not completely factual. I know. I mean, what he's saying is a lot of hyperbole, we believe.
Just so our listeners know, how are migrants primarily entering either country? Is it usually land, sea, air? Is there one method that's really more used, or do we know that?
Primarily, they enter legally, irregular means between ports of entry quite often. I mean, sometimes they come with visas that are, not actually for the intention that they're coming into Canada in. There's a lot of different methods, though. Yeah.
And how bad is the fentanyl crisis?
I mean, the fentanyl crisis, we live in cities. We see it in Ottawa. We see it in all of our major cities. That is not made here, right? It is coming into Canada from abroad. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Trump talks about the problem it is for the U.S. and implies that this is pouring over the border from the north. It is not. That is not where their fentanyl is coming from. Very little of it, if any, is coming from here.
Right.
On our side, we worry about what comes into Canada, though. Obviously, it's hugely negative on all Canadians to have that coming in, right?
Yeah. As I discussed in the introduction, the government is going to spend some additional resources for the RCMP and for CBSA in terms of shoring up security at the border. Our union, USJE, we represent civilian and public service employees, some of them within the RCMP. So we want to know, how does the RCMP assist in securing the border with officers employed by the CBSA? How do they work together, and how is it separated?
Yeah, so right now, if it's at a port of entry, where people are legally to cross, that's the CBSA that takes care of it. Everything in between, that's the RCMP that takes care of. That's based on a 1932 order in council. We're talking Prohibition era order in council that essentially gave that work over to the RCMP to do. It's really within the CBSA's mandate to do it. It's simply kind of been parceled out to someone else to do for now.
And that was something I was going to chat with you. You did write a letter to the then Public Service Minister. It was Dominique Leblanc. You sent that letter on December 2nd, prior to the government making their funding announcement. And to summarize your letter, from what I took from it, there were really two main key asks in there, according to me. And one of them is what you just mentioned. And I'll quote from your letter, and it goes as follows. As you know, nothing in the Customs Act or the Immigration Refugee Protections Act prevents CBSA officers from performing their duties between ports of entry. In fact, the legislation explicitly provides for it. However, as confirmed to us by the agency itself, law enforcement between ports of entry remains the purview of the RCMP due to a nearly century-old 1932 order in council still in effect. So have you been lobbying the government for a long time to change that order in council? Like, what has been your take on it, and do you see that changing anytime soon?
I mean, every chance we get, I met with the new minister yesterday to discuss exactly that. I mean, 1932, we're talking Prohibition era.
Right.
Obviously, the border has changed. Elliot Ness is not chasing rum runners across the border anymore. Right?
Exactly.
And I'm guessing that's what that was there for at the time, I think. I don't really know.
Right.
We're looking for resources to help do that work between ports of entry. We have provincial governments saying that Parks is going to be doing some of it, sheriffs, marshals, task force, response units, whatever each province calls it and whatever provincial resources they put toward it. Really, it's the CBSA's job to do, right? And we're simply not doing it. We're tooled, we're trained. The Immigration Refugee Protection Act, the Customs Act are really all we do. We are, us in the RCMP, really the only ones with the legal authority to even do that work between ports of entry, yet the plans seem to always include everyone but us, oddly, because of that 1932 order in council. I heard someone tell me it's as though you have, 12 people on a skating rink with sticks and a puck. How are we going to have the hockey game? Well, let's call someone else.
Right.
We're there. That's all we do. Surely we should be able to do that job, right?
Yeah, and you raise a good point, too. I mean, we're looking at marshal expansion. Some province, even in Alberta, we're talking about creating their own provincial police force. We have the RCMP, but one agency that's constantly looking at the border and their sole purpose is a CBSA. So it would just make sense to empower them and give them all the tools. So in your world, in your view, and from hearing from your members, your number one ask would be that to kind of relook at that order in council?
Absolutely. It's one of them. what we see now, because of those limited provincial authorities, when we talk about them helping to interdict between ports of entry, if they do that, they're going to have to call someone with the legal authority, which is only us in the RCMP.
Right.
So we're actually going to have situations, we envision, where one of these provincial forces will see someone crossing into Canada between a port of entry, let's say crossing a field. So they're going to then call the RCMP. The RCMP, depending on what's going on, could be there in maybe an hour, 2, 3, whatever the case may be. Whereas us sitting at the port of entry, perhaps a minute down the road, they can't call us. It's really seems an odd scenario to be supporting.
And especially where the RCMP is already facing shortages on so many fronts, right? But that's another story for another podcast. But Mr. Weber, another point that was really highlighted in your letter to the Public Safety Minister on December 2nd, and I'll quote again, I love this line, a properly staffed border is a secure border, end quote. It's to the point. How is staffing right now at the border, and how has it changed in the last 5 years or so?
It's changed significantly. We've seen more and more resources allocated away from the ports of entry. So when we look at overall numbers, the overall numbers have not really gone down that much. We went through DRAP in 2013 under the former Conservative government. We lost about 1,100 members. Those were not replaced. At ports of entry themselves, when we look at the numbers of officers actually doing the work where the travelers cross, those numbers they've dropped dramatically. And we see an agency that's really focused on replacing that gap with technology. Like we see the pick machines you see at all airports now. I mean, really, that system is travelers coming in without speaking to any officer at all. You're depending largely on self-declaration to find anything you want to keep out of Canada. And we see the agency looking to land borders now to, plans around bringing in similar technologies where you'll soon be able to self-declare at a land border. And we look at less and less and less. When you look for less, you find less, right? It seems obvious.
It does.
And, if you're waiting for a smuggler to self-declare, we're still waiting.
Right. Yeah. I think every ordinary Canadian can agree with that. Now, what are the other asks by your union in order to secure the border, and what would improve the day-to-day working conditions of your members who are frontline officers?
I mean, proper staffing. They are tired. I mean, we have ports of entry where the overtime is almost unlimited.
Really?
Looked at a stat recently. We make up about 3% of the federal public service. The CBSA does. We account for 20% of the overtime paid out by the federal public service. To give you an idea of the hours people work just really to keep the lights on, right? And that's bare minimum. It is desperate, and you see those numbers going down over the years. We've gotten busier while the numbers have gone down. So the problem gets worse and worse. To add to that, our current system has one training center for all of our recruits in Rigaud, Quebec. The maximum number of recruits they could pump out is just under 600 a year. They never reach 600. It's usually 400 and change. That's attrition. So you're not equipped to ever get your numbers up, and the staffing levels are so low, it's to the point where regions will not release officers to train because they can't spare the staff to become a trainer, to train new recruits. You're almost at a point where it's a chicken and the egg thing.
Yep.
I can't train them because I can't release anyone from the front line to become a trainer because my numbers are so low.
Right.
It's extremely desperate, and they feel it. And I think for our members' mental health as well, unions, you think of the primary role of a union. It's collective agreements.
Yep.
It's grievances. It's health and safety. It's human rights. It's all of those things that we think are the bread and butter of a union, right? Our members, usually the primary thing that I hear when I go to a port of entry is, man, I just want to do my job. Right. I used to find stuff. I used to be able to search the truck or search the ship or search the bag. I do paperwork now with the lineup that I never see the end of, working unlimited overtime. People get into this line of work because they want to work in law enforcement. They want to keep Canadians safe. They see real value in what they do when you do good work. It feels great to be able to find an illegal handgun that was coming into the country to do something terrible. Right. That's why you do the work. And to work one of these jobs now and to just be in a position where I don't even do that anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's really tough on them, and you could see it take a toll.
I know something else that's really impacting your members because they are frontline officers, your union members who work for the CBSA, but I have the feeling they don't get the same treatment as other frontline officers when it comes to pension, 25 and now. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Man, 25 and out. It's
you almost got it,
so
right?
Close, huh? So close. We've been working so hard for so long to get that. And it's really working that hard and that long to get something that almost all other law enforcement has. It's just given, right?
Right.
So we are finally in a position where we have the current government who is in favor. The money was promised in the fall economic statement. We've gotten repeated commitment from the Liberal government that this is something they want to see happen. The NDP has supported us on it. The Bloc looks supportive of it. So it's there. However, it's prorogued now.
Right.
So we're really hoping when everyone returns in March that there will be a window for that legislation to be passed. I met with the minister yesterday. I'm meeting with anyone who thinks they could find a way to just make this happen because we are so close, right? And when we talk about staffing and attrition, I mean, that's one of the big reasons that our members leave. They work for the CBSA. They're an officer for so many years. They see an opening at whatever police agency. Go work there for 5 years and I could retire.
Right.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
I mean, working an extra 5-10 years, that is a significant difference, right?
To be clear, I would never do the job of one of your officers or RCMP. I wouldn't have the guts, so I value everything that your members do and the way they protect our Canadian borders because, man, they do such a good job at it. But having said all that and all the issues we've discussed and being so close for 25 and out and now just like dangling over your head, what's the current mood of your members with all the attention being focused on the border and everything in the pot right now? How are they feeling?
I think overall, regarding the 25 and out specifically, anxious. I think they are confident that we as a union are doing everything we can, which we are. We've gotten it right to here. We're not giving up. We are going to get it. It might take a bit longer than we thought, but we're getting it. Absolutely, no doubt. And regarding, the rhetoric we hear coming from south of us, a little bit worried that we're not going to have resources in place. A little bit worried about. We hear talk about a flood of people coming across the border into Canada. Yeah. I think frustrated as well that, again, when we talk about plans around border task force and such, we're omitted from those. Again, though, the one agency who you think would be looked at first to actually fulfill their legal mandate to protect the border, nowhere in the CBSA mandate does it say protect the port of entry.
Right.
The border, that's the entire border from coast to coast, right?
Wow.
And we just kind of... They look at it as though their agency has let them down. You would expect that your employer who has that mandate would want to fulfill their mandate.
Yeah.
They seem happy to let everyone else do their work for them.
Interesting. It's kind of sad. One last question, and this is another controversial question, again, caused by Trump, but I want to know what your take is, because we started to see this message resonate with some right-wing conservatives in Canada. So there are some Canadians who are calling for mass deportations, similar to what Trump has promised down south. What's your union's response to these calls? And by extension, how do deportations work in Canada?
I mean, mass deportations. I don't even really know what that means.
I mean, I don't think anyone does.
There's a legal process in place. Everyone has the right to that legal process, and it should be followed. People have a right to make a claim here. People have a right to make a refugee claim here. People have a right to come here to work, to come here to study.
Yep.
I understand there's frustration sometimes on our members' parts when we see people, let's be clear, lying to circumvent legal ways to get in, and that's their job to interdict and make sure that doesn't happen, right? But I mean, mass rounds of people in Canada to deport them willy-nilly, that's crazy talk. I mean, that's un-Canadian in my opinion.
Yeah. That's
somewhere we should never go.
Mr. Weber, National President of the Customs Immigration Union, from us here at the Safety Net, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of Canadians when we extend our gratitude to your union members in keeping Canadians safe, in keeping our borders safe. I'm sure Canadians have the back of your union members. Thank you so much for having taken the time to join us here and speak on behalf of your members.
It was a lot of fun. Anytime.
Merci. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Union Safety Net, Le Filet de Sécurité Syndicale, a union podcast created by USJE for working people. If you have any feedback on today's episode or would like to suggest a topic you want us to cover, please reach out on social media platforms. We love to hear from our listeners. I'm your host, Sébastien Bezeau, and I hope you'll join us next month for another episode of the Union Safety Net, le filet de sécurité syndicale.